Elon Musk was not one to believe in signs, literal or otherwise. However, as he turned a corner on that quiet Los Angeles night, one drew his attention. God's love is free. Ask me why. The man holding the sign didn't appear desperate or even eager to be noticed. He simply stared at the stars as if they held answers Elon hadn't yet inquired about. Against his better judgment, Elon paused. "What's this about?" he questioned. The man smiled. It depends. What are you seeking?" Elon blinked, taken aback. He wasn't accustomed to being questioned, especially by strangers. Yet instead of walking away, he remained. Elon stood there, looking at the man who had dared to engage him with such calm assurance. The hum of distant traffic faded, leaving only the gentle sound of the wind rustling through the empty street. Something about the man felt unsettling. His gaze wasn't judgmental, yet it seemed to see right through him. Just as Elon thought he would regain control of the conversation, the man spoke again, sending his thoughts spiraling. "You've created rockets, conquered industries, and transformed how the world envisions the future," the man said softly, his voice steady. "But tell me this, what's the purpose of reaching for the stars if you've never connected with your own soul?" The words struck Elon like a sudden gust of wind. He was not a man given to introspection. His life revolved around logic, innovation, and forward momentum. Yet here he stood, before a homeless man whose question left him momentarily speechless. He opened his mouth to reply, but no words emerged. This wasn't a problem he could address with equations or algorithms. Finally, Elon managed to chuckle, trying to dismiss the odd sensation that had gripped him. "Touch my soul? That's poetic, but not really quantifiable, is it?" The man, who still hadn't revealed his name, tilted his head slightly, as though amused by Elon's dismissal. "Not everything that matters can be quantified," he said, "and not everything you quantify truly matters." Elon blinked. For someone who was constantly surrounded by sycophants and yes-men, this was a rare instance. A stranger who didn't care about his wealth or fame was challenging him in a way no one ever had. "Who are you?" Elon asked, his curiosity getting the best of him. The man smiled faintly. "Just someone who understands what it's like to lose everything and discover something greater." Elon crossed his arms, skepticism creeping back into his voice. "And what is that something greater?" The man gestured to the cardboard sign beside him. "Love, purpose, truth, the things you can't program or patent." Elon glanced down at the sign, then back at the man. "You're sitting out here alone with just a blanket and a piece of cardboard. Are you saying you found all those things?" The man's smile remained unchanged. "I didn't say I found them here. I found them when I stopped pursuing everything else." Elon's mind raced. On the surface, the man's words sounded ludicrous, but deep down, he felt the sting of their truth. He had everything: money, power, influence, and yet there were times when it all felt empty. Moments he never allowed himself to dwell on until now. "All right," Elon said finally, his voice resolute. "Let's say you're right, and there's some truth I'm missing. How would I even begin to search for it?" The man's eyes brightened, as if he'd been anticipating this very question. "You begin by relinquishing the notion that you already have all the answers. Come with me, and I'll show you what I mean." Elon hesitated. The logical part of his mind urged him to walk away, to dismiss this as nonsense. But another part of him, a part he didn't fully understand, compelled him to stay. And so, for reasons he couldn't articulate, he nodded. "All right, show me." The man stood, folding his blanket with careful precision. "Good. But I should warn you, it's not what you expect." And just like that, Elon Musk, a man who built his empire on certainty and control, took his first step into the unknown. Little did he know this journey would expose truths that even he wasn't ready to confront. Elon followed the man, Daniel, as he finally introduced himself, through a maze of quiet streets and dimly lit alleys. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if he were leaving more behind than just the bustling world of Los Angeles. He wanted to ask where they were headed, but something about Daniel's calm demeanor made him pause. The man didn't say much, his silence only adding to the intrigue. Elon's logical mind tried to piece together what kind of truth Daniel could reveal, But just as he began to feel foolish for following along, Daniel halted abruptly, turning to face him. "Look. What you're searching for isn't ahead, it's within." He pointed at Elon's chest. "But most people won't allow themselves to look that deeply." Elon raised an eyebrow, more bewildered than ever. "And how does navigating dark alleys fit into this grand metaphor?" Daniel chuckled, his voice echoing softly off the brick walls. "Not everything is a metaphor, Mr. Musk. Sometimes you must walk through darkness to appreciate the light." Before Elon could reply, Daniel gestured toward a building ahead, a dilapidated church with boarded-up windows. It looked abandoned, a remnant of a forgotten era. "Here we are," Daniel said simply. "This is where you're taking me?" Elon asked, doubt creeping into his tone. Daniel nodded, pushing open a side door that creaked loudly on its hinges. Warm light poured out, a striking contrast to the cold, empty streets outside. "Step inside. You'll encounter a different kind of wealth." The air was filled with the faint scent of candles and the sound of hushed voices. A small group of people sat in a circle near the front, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of flickering flames. Their clothing was worn, their faces etched with struggle, but their expressions radiated peace, even contentment. "These are my people," Daniel said quietly, gesturing for Elon to join the circle. "They've lost everything society values, yet they've discovered something it can never take away." Elon hesitated, unsure of what to say or how to behave. He was accustomed to commanding attention in rooms filled with executives and investors, but here he felt out of place, exposed. One of the women, an elderly lady with compassionate eyes, looked up and smiled at him. "Welcome," she said simply, as if she had been expecting him. Elon nodded politely, sitting down at the edge of the circle. For the next hour, he listened as the group shared their experiences. They spoke of pain, lost jobs, broken families, and struggles with addiction. But they also shared hope, highlighting how they found strength in their faith and in one another. At first, Elon felt like an outsider, a spectator to lives so different from his own. But as the stories unfolded, he couldn't help but feel an unusual sense of connection. These individuals, who had nothing by societal standards, appeared to possess a kind of peace he had never known. Finally, Daniel turned to him. "Your turn." Elon blinked, caught off guard. "What?" "Share your story with us," Daniel said, his tone gentle yet firm. "Not the one everyone knows. The real one." Elon hesitated. He was not accustomed to being vulnerable, especially not with strangers, but as the group's expectant gazes turned toward him, he found himself speaking before he could overthink it. He talked about his drive to innovate, the sacrifices he had made, and the moments of loneliness he never confessed to anyone. And as the words flowed, he realized how much he had been holding in. When he finished, the room fell silent for a moment. Then Daniel spoke. "You've created machines to change the world, but what have you built for yourself?" The room fell quiet after Daniel's question. And for a moment, Elon felt as if the weight of the world rested heavily on his shoulders. But just as he began to respond, a loud banging echoed through the church. Everyone froze. The door burst open, and a group of men in uniforms entered, their flashlights cutting through the dim light. "This property is condemned," one of them declared, his voice cold and authoritative. "Everyone needs to leave immediately." The group began to scatter, fear evident on their faces. Daniel stood calmly, facing the officers without flinching. "This is a sanctuary," he said firmly. "These people have nowhere else to go." "Not my problem," the officer retorted. "You've got 10 minutes to clear out, or we're calling in backup." Elon, who had been sitting silently, suddenly stood up. "Wait a minute," he said, his voice commanding. "Do you know who I am?" The officer gave him a skeptical glance. "I don't care who you are. The law is the law." Elon's mind raced. He was used to wielding power in every situation, but here he felt powerless. For the first time in years, he understood that money and influence couldn't resolve everything. After the officers left, the group reassembled, their energy subdued but not broken. Elon sat beside Daniel, who seemed surprisingly unfazed by the recent events. "This happens often, doesn't it?" Elon asked. Daniel nodded. "More than you'd think. But you can't combat darkness with more darkness. You have to be the light." Elon frowned, frustrated by the simplicity of the statement. But you can't simply let people push you around. There must be a way to safeguard this place. Daniel regarded him thoughtfully. The world doesn't need another confrontation, Mr. Musk. It needs individuals willing to stand for something without losing themselves in the process. The words lingered with Elon long after he exited the church that night. He couldn't sleep, unable to stop reflecting on the people he'd encountered. For all his success, he realized there were battles he had never acknowledged. Battles that couldn't be won with strategy or brute force. And for the first time in a long time, he felt something he couldn't quite label. Was it guilt? Or was it the faint flicker of purpose? Over the next few days, Elon immersed himself in finding a solution. He researched laws, consulted experts, and even called in favors from influential contacts. But none of it felt sufficient. He kept replaying Daniel's words in his mind. Be the light. Finally, he made a decision. A bold, unprecedented move. He called a press conference. Standing before a sea of cameras and reporters, everyone anticipated another groundbreaking announcement, perhaps about a new Tesla model or an update on the Mars mission. Instead, Elon spoke about the individuals he'd met at the church and the challenges they faced. I've dedicated my life to building the future, he stated. But tonight I'm committing to creating something else, a network of sanctuaries where people can find hope and healing. The announcement astonished the world. Critics labeled it a PR stunt. But for Elon, it wasn't about public opinion. It was about doing something that finally felt right. Months later, Elon returned to the now renovated church. It was thriving. No longer a crumbling relic, but a vibrant sanctuary for those in need. The soft hum of conversation and the sound of children's laughter spilled into the streets. Daniel stood at the door, waiting for him, a broad smile lighting up his face. You've accomplished something extraordinary, Daniel said as they embraced. No, Elon replied, shaking his head. I didn't do this. The people here, they're the ones who made it happen. I merely provided them with the tools. Daniel's eyes sparkled. Sometimes giving others the tools is the most crucial thing you can do. They stepped inside, where a group had gathered for an evening meal. People greeted Elon warmly, some even sharing stories of how their lives had transformed. He listened, his heart swelling with a sense of fulfillment he hadn't experienced in years. This wasn't the fleeting satisfaction of a successful launch or a profitable quarter. This was something deeper. As the sun set, casting a warm golden light over the sanctuary, Elon stood in the doorway beside Daniel. The sound of church bells echoed through the streets, a reminder that even in the darkest times, hope could rise. Daniel turned to him, his expression serious now. You've taken the first step, Elon. But this is just the beginning. There's more work to be done. Elon smiled, his mind already buzzing with ideas. What's next? He asked, genuinely curious. Daniel's response was simple, yet profound. You'll know when the time is right. Just don't stop listening. For the first time in a long time, Elon felt at peace, not because he had resolved a problem or achieved a goal, but because he had embraced a purpose larger than himself. And as he walked away from the sanctuary, he realized something. The man who had once dreamed of conquering space had finally found his place on Earth.